Please note that the webinar is for informational purposes only and it is not intended to offer advice or guidance on legal, tax, or investment matters. Such advice can only be given with a full understanding of an individual's specific situation. That being done, let's meet our panel. Daniel Tostado is a French attorney and US attorney and founder of Cabinet Daniel Tostado, a law firm in Paris for French inbound immigration. Daniel is more than happy to help make your dream of moving to or staying in France long-term a reality. He knows intimately every category of French immigration and how best to navigate the system to obtain visas and residency permits for you. Daniel is originally from San Diego, California. Talking of California, Tom Zakistel is co-founder of Euro American Financial Advisors, which specializes in investment and financial planning for Americans moving to Europe. Tom has an MBA in global management from Thunderbird University in Glendale, Arizona, and holds the Chartered Financial Analyst (CFA) credential and is a certified financial planner. Tom lives in the San Francisco area, having previously lived overseas in several different countries. He's been providing investment advisory services to American expats for over 20 years. Benjamin Peak is a dual qualified US certified public accountant and French expert comptable, and the co-founder of Expand CPA. With over 10 years experience serving the American expat community in France, he advises individuals and companies on cross-border tax, payroll, and company setup with practical plain English guidance. A regular speaker on US-France topics, he brings a bilingual, business-minded approach to complex filings, social contributions, and employment status. Pierre-Alain Conil, known to his clients as Pierre the Notaire, from Morel D'Arleux, is one of very few French notaires who studied law in the United States. With his LLM from Boston College, Pierre has a decade of experience focusing on international US-related matters. Pierre primarily advises his US clients on real estate transactions, estate settlement, and estate planning. So, without further ado, over to you, Daniel.
Wonderful. So we're all getting 10 minutes on the clock, so I'll start my personal timer now. So as Hugo correctly framed it, I would like to say that I know each category of visa intimately. I've been on travailleur temporaire, étudiant, APS, entrepreneur, conjoint d'Européen, and then I've become a French citizen. So I've seen it, and then within the colleagues in the firm, they've seen salarié, work holiday visa, talent passport, VPF, which is the private family life category. So we've lived it all, and then of course in our professional activity we do it all 10 hours a day. So my core conclusion that I want everyone to retain when they hear this presentation today is that if you want to make the move here to France, that there is a manner to do it, and that there's nearly always a category that can fit for various people that are looking to move here to France. That there may be a couple different buckets of people, depending on where they are in their life journey, that might determine which visa is the best fit for them. There's generally 4 different types of visa category. There's the long stay visitor visa, which we'll talk about a lot today, the student status, which we'll talk about less, a relationship-based status, or work-based status. And work splits into work as an entrepreneur or work as an employee. So it's usually by process of deduction that one determines what's the best visa category for one's situation. That if you're not in a significant relationship with a French or an EU national, you can kind of eliminate that third option. The student route is usually good for someone in their, let's say their 20s, or even can be a little bit older, someone who either interested in coming to France to learn French intensively or pursue a master's degree. Those are really good situations for people on the student route. I have a feeling that people that are quality enough to sit down and watch an hour-long webinar by finance guys might not be the 20-year-olds filing for the student visa. So I'm not sure if that crowd is this crowd. So we'll see the nature of the Q&A, who actually chimes in. Otherwise, there's of all those many options that I just gave, the 3 that I really regularly see, whether it's UK or US nationals making the move here to France, is that visitor visa, student route, or entrepreneur. So very often then my clients are picking between entrepreneur and visitor. The first question that I would then have for the person is, what is their work situation? Are they looking to be working here in France? If they're looking to set up shop here in France, like let's say, for various activities, and it's really fun in my field of work to see the various types of things people want to do, whether it's they want to go to French baking school and then set up an American style, pastry shop in France, or they want to do a rural bed and breakfast, like a gîte with a certain thematic, like vegan eating or a yoga studio, or there's a lot of different ways in which one can set up a company. Or they've got a US-based company and they want to set up a branch, a filiale here in France. Then I would look towards that entrepreneur status, the entrepreneur profession libérale, entrepreneur liberal profession visa category. And that's usually if they're by themselves. If they're married, then we start to talk about a very, very similar category, the talent passport corporate creation. Those two categories have four main criteria. Show me you've got a real and serious business idea. Show me that it can make more than 22,000 euros, that you've got multiple clients, not just one client, and some of those clients are at least theoretically located here in France. And so it's a big effort because I'd say the barrier is relatively high, that they want to see a solid business plan, a solid financial projection. And of course, with my clients, we do a lot of hand-holding these various steps to make sure that this goes well successfully and that you can actually make that move here to France. So that is by and large the entrepreneur status. And just to kind of map out what that looks long term. So in the short term, you're getting entrepreneur, usually goes 1 year and then 4 years upon renewal. After 5 years being here, you can ask for the 10-year card. After 5 years being here, you can also start to ask for naturalization. And the beauty of naturalization is that if you're filing for and you have children and they get it while they're still minors, then they can get French citizenship through you. So that can be a very interesting route. For my clients who are not looking to set up shop here in France, I then usually recommend the long stay visitor visa. And the long stay visitor visa, I'd probably say ends up being about 60% of our clients get that category. So with my remaining 5 minutes, we'll want to talk about that. Um, it is really good for retirees, which is maybe a core constituency of people watching this today. It's really good for people who are financially independent and not looking to work here in France at all. There is a legal gray area around the question of international telework that the French consulate, prefecture, and the Ministry of Interior say yes, and confirm in writing, yes, you can, that the French tax authorities say no, you cannot. So there's tension within the French government on this matter. And I can only guess that it hasn't meant that Benjamin Peake has lost sleep at night about this issue. Um, but it's the big issue in French immigration law. Can I or can I not do international teleworking for a non-French company on the visitor visa? Um, there is two things to say on that front beyond what I've already said so far. One is that we've looked through case law, we've looked through this up and down. Has anyone ever gotten in trouble for teleworking on this visitor visa? And the answer is no. The answer that then the accountants might say is yes, but that day may come. So that is a very complete image of the picture of international teleworking on the visitor visa. I could talk about that specific theme just for 20 more minutes, but I won't. I'll spare you. That's the Cliff Notes version of it. So on the visitor visa, I would say the threshold is relatively low, especially when compared to an entrepreneur visa. They want to see that you're financially stable, that you've got that you've got healthcare lined up, and that you've got housing lined up. The housing can be 3 months at Airbnb. The finances can be 17,000 euros coming your way over the past 12 months. And 17,017 is not that much for an American. That's less than 2,000 euros a month. Um, it's based off of French minimum wage net, 17,000. And then we think about any French, American-sized revenue, and we can usually almost always be above that threshold. And then in terms of the healthcare, we have to get a 12-month policy to get this visitor visa. But once you're here in France, you are allowed to eventually to file for French public health care. It is a human right in France to have health care, and that everyone here in France can get it. What they get is called the carte vitale, and this covers you in France. And so that after a certain point, you drop the private coverage, you are on the public system. And with that, you're one step closer to belonging to this country. Um, and on that visitor status, it also can feed into that 10-year card. It's an annual status, so you renew it annually, and you can renew it indefinitely, and I have clients that do. Otherwise, after 5 years, you can ask for the 10-year card. I like the 10-year card because it's valid for 10 years, so it gets the prefecture off your back for 10 years. And it includes work authorization. So in case you wanted to sell art on the weekend or set up a company or what have you, you could do that on that 10-year card. Recent French rulings have come out to say that they don't want to see retirees naturalizing, that They're putting a heavy emphasis nowadays on the center of your economic and familial interest, that your job has to be in France, your spouse has to be in France, your minor child has to be in France. And so on the financial side of things, if you're receiving a pension of 4,000 euros a month and receiving nothing from France, they're going to say, well, monsieur, madame, you don't have the center of your economic interest here in France. So for those retirees moving here to France, but are not taking a French job, their long-term goal is usually aiming for that 10-year card. Um, and that's French immigration in a nutshell. We get the visa sticker from the French consulate. On the US side, you file with an office that's now called TLS. It's a service provider that receives you and your documents and does the fingerprinting. We then scan the document, send it over to the French consulate in DC that makes the real decision. Um, and it's a visa sticker in your passport for year one, and then year two and going forward, it's a residency permit card. I would show you mine, but I'm French now, so I can't be bothered. But this is what a French ID card looks like, and it's the same sense as like a US style driver's license, and that is yeah, essentially how it works. The three things I always want to make sure my clients are keeping in mind as they make this successful move here to France is what's the right visa for me? How does healthcare work? And how does taxes work? And on the tax side, I will hold my tongue and yield the floor to Benjamin as he eventually gets to that side of things. But in the meantime, I believe Tom is the next speaker. I'll yield the floor back to Hugo.
Yeah, so Tom, would you like to, I think, Benjamin, you might have to stop sharing your screen and Tom, share yours and unmute.
Okay, let me try sharing my screen then. Let's see. Is that working? Well, I hope that's working. Yeah, okay, good.
Yes.
All right, so yeah, here I am. A little intro to Euro American Financial Advisors, and we actually have two businesses. So we have a business in the US that I run out of San Francisco called International Asset Management, which is a registered investment advisor with the SEC in the US, and it's been dealing with expats for over 25 years, dealing with Americans in France for over 25 years. And in fact, my first client 25 years ago was an American living in France, and he's still a client today. And then about 3 years ago, we started a firm called Euro American Financial Advisors, which is based out of Spain, but it has a MiFID license to operate everywhere in Europe, well, in 10 European countries, including France. And we did that because we can see the day coming where the European regulators might mandate that people living in Europe deal with an EU licensed firm. So we thought we better set that up. That's run by my colleague Shane Clark, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. But I'm also involved in that business. And in my own background, I'm a CFA, CFP. I used to be president of the Financial Planning Association in San Francisco. And so the question we get from people moving to France or to Europe in general is, what is the one thing I should do before I move? And there's really not one thing, but from our perspective as investment managers and financial planners, the number one issue we run into is that most US banks and brokerage firms just don't want to deal with Americans living abroad anymore. And so as a registered investment advisor, it's our US firm that has relationships with Charles Schwab and Interactive Brokers. That's where we hold our clients' accounts. Both brokerage firms are good at dealing with Americans living abroad, but Schwab has some nuances depending on the country and specifically related to France. If we want to deal with Schwab, we have to open the account up while you're still in the US, and then when you move to France, you can change the address to French address. You don't need a US address, but Schwab will not allow people living in France to open new brokerage accounts. With Interactive Brokers, which is also a large US discount brokerage firm, they will deal with Americans in France and practically anywhere else and allow you to open accounts from anywhere, but they're not as user friendly as Schwab. They're also not a bank, so they don't offer things like a debit card or checking, and Schwab does. So probably the number one question before you move is to make sure that your bank or brokerage firm will still deal with you, and also that you can log into the accounts, because two-factor authentication is a problem sometimes. Okay, and so moving along, Europe is a heavily regulated place, and what are the issues actually related to investment accounts specifically? And there's a bunch of them. I'm not going to talk about the tax issues, but basically it's Benjamin will talk about that later, I'm sure. But basically, it's problematic to hold non-U.S. Mutual funds or exchange traded funds. So you're better off leaving your investment dollars in the U.S., dealing with U.S. firms. So you get the 1099s at the end of the year. So you get the SIPC protection, $500,000. In Europe, it's much lower than that. I think less than 100,000 euros in most places. And also, so you avoid these tax reporting issues related to non-US funds. And there are other issues as well. For example, if you open your own account with Schwab as a European resident, they will not allow you to buy US exchange traded funds, although we can buy them for our clients as a US based advisor. And then what do we do? Well, basically two services: investment management, investment advice, and financial planning. And so what does that mean? And what's special about what we do, in fact? So on the investment side, we have 5 risk-based strategies going from most conservative to most aggressive. But what's a bit different is that we have a pretty global perspective. Our accounts are about 50% US, 50% non-US, and that's a bit different for a US advisory firm. Most are pretty much US based. We can also put together an investment account in euros, euro denominated. And through interactive brokers, we can have multi-currency accounts, good exchange rates from US to dollars, wiring in and out or SEPA transfers are possible as well through interactive brokers. And Schwab as well, you can wire money out of your account in euros and they give a decent exchange rate. On the financial planning side, a financial plan is like a personal income statement, balance sheet, cash flow, which incorporates goals and life events. And specifically, we focus on cross-border issues in our financial planning offering. And what is financial planning? Like this is to answer questions like, have you saved enough for retirement? How much can you spend in retirement? You know, buying or renting a property, we can model that, or a vacation home. Healthcare and long-term care is quite different, right? You might be able to get on the National Health Plan, but long-term care insurance is not common outside the US, so you have to make different provision for that, for example. Integration of pension. If you've been working abroad, you might have Social Security from the US, you might have other pensions or Social Security from other places that kick in at different, at various times, at different ages. So how to coordinate all that to optimize the tax effects and to provide the income you need. And then finally, also estate planning enters into this, which can be quite different overseas. What kind of things do we run into on the expat investment management side? I mean, what's different about it? Well, there are tax treaty issues. For example, Roth accounts are not recognized in many tax treaties. So sometimes they're treated as taxable accounts in other countries. So advice you might get from a US advisor telling you to do a conversion, a Roth conversion from an IRA might not be the best way to go if you're actually going to be living in a place where Roth accounts are not recognized as tax deferred or as tax free the way they are in the US. Currency issues. The US dollar has been weakening lately and it goes up and down. You know, it's not like the stock market goes in one direction, but it can go up and down for a long period of time. And so having the ability to invest in euros or to get good exchange rates is also valuable on the expat side. And then I already mentioned which banks and brokerage firms, Schwab, Interactive Brokers, but very few others will deal with US expats, or sometimes, like in the case of Fidelity, for example, they won't kick you out, but they'll want to freeze your account, meaning that you can sell but not buy, which isn't very useful, really. Also, certain types of investments, U.S. mutual funds, you won't have access to those as an EU resident. Exchange traded funds can be problematic to access if you have your own account through Schwab or Interactive Brokers. So those kinds of things come into play. And then finally, we have relationships with people like the ones, for example, that are on this call in various countries around Europe, tax advisors, estate planning attorneys, and we work with these people to give you a comprehensive financial plan and meet your needs that way. And then I get the question a lot these days: how do I get my money out of the USA? And that's a great question, but it has many answers. So if you actually want to get your money into an account that's held outside the US, that's not easy for a US citizen. It's possible, but it's usually expensive. You don't get the same investor protections and so on. However, it is possible and relatively easy to invest outside of US dollars. We can even do that in a US account, a Schwab account, by holding ETFs or what are called ADRs, American Depository Receipts, which are shares of non-US companies that trade in the US, or ETFs that invest outside the US. As long as they're not hedged back to the US dollar, you get the currency effect of that. So in that sense, you're investing outside of US dollars. And in an Interactive Brokers account, we can hold euro investments directly. We can trade on the European exchanges. So there are various ways to do it. And it's a bit of a personal discussion on what's the best way to meet your particular needs. And so finally, what is actually a cross-border advisor and what makes it special from any other advisor in the US? Because a lot of American firms will have clients overseas. So first of all, I already mentioned we have the two firms with the two licenses. And we've been doing this for over 25 years. 90% of our clients are Americans living abroad in about 30 different countries, many expats in France for 25 years now. We also have European financial planning designations, which is a bit special. I mean, very few US advisors will have those credentials. And finally, we've been expats ourselves. So I've been an expat. I actually used to work for a French company before I was a financial advisor. I used to work for a company called Schlumberger. I was an engineer in the oil services business. I worked in many places in the Middle East, Southeast Asia, a little bit in France as well. So, and my colleague Shane Clark as well has been an expat for many years. And like I say, almost all of our clients are expats as well. So it's nice to have that background. So that's what makes us a little bit special, and that's what we do. And it's not just about moving to France. There are a number of other issues. Once you're there, ongoing issues. And I won't go through all these because we don't have time for that, but we certainly help you address things, not just when you're moving there, although it's best to create the relationship while you're still in the US before you move so that we can address some of these issues that are coming up. But if you're already in France or other part of Europe, there are maybe other issues you have to deal with that we can help with as well. And so that's it for me. And here's our contact info, and I'll pass it on to whoever is next.
Hi, one sec, I'm just trying to find my slide. Can you see my slide now?
Yes.
Perfect. Perfect. And thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Tom, for the first presentations. My name is Benjamin Pic. I'm a French and US CPA, and basically I help American people moving to France by filing both French and US tax returns. If you want to get more information about my company, you can scan the QR code here. But because we don't have a lot of time, so I'm going to go straight to the point. Just to discuss tonight what we're going to discuss in a few minutes, basically. We're going to talk about the tax liability in France, the tax residency, what's basically a French taxable income. We're going to talk about the tax treaty between France and the US, which is working very great for American people moving to France. And then if we have time, we're going to speak about like the wealth tax and other topics. Moving forward to the tax liability in France, there is basically two things that make you tax liable toward the French tax authority. Is if you're a French tax resident, basically you need to report your worldwide income to the French tax authority. And the second thing is if you're not a French resident, you only need to report to the French tax authority your French source of incomes. So just two types of scenarios, or you're a French tax resident, and we are going to discuss what does it mean, and you need to report your worldwide income, or you're not a French resident and you only need to report to the French tax authority your source of income from France. So basically, what is the tax residency in France? There is, make it short, two rules. If you spend in France more than 183 days in France in the calendar year, so from January 1st to December 31st, if you spend more than 6 months in France, you are basically by fact considered as a French resident. And if you spend in France less than 6 months, but you have the intention to stay in France for long term, which means you basically carry professional activities, personal activities, or economic activities, you might be considered as a French resident, even if you spend in France less than 6 months. If you are not sure, it's very important to talk to a professional to understand if you're a tax resident or not. And as Daniel mentioned in his presentation, it's very important to distinguish the visa statute, your immigration statute, from your tax status. Sometimes you might have the visa to be in France, but you're not a tax resident because you're basically not living in France. And sometimes you're living in France, but you don't have the right visa, for example, to work in France. So it's very important to distinguish your visa situation, your immigration situation from your tax situation. So we're going to talk about the tax treaty between France and the US because it's very important to understand if you move to France and if you're a tax resident, what you need to report and how you're going to apply your tax credit on your US source of income. Just to give you an overall on the tax rate in France, it's going from 0% to 45%. And you have, as in the country, you have deduction, tax credit on deduction for alimony, for example, child support, charitable contribution, and everything. What is very important to understand is the tax treaty between France and the US, and that's why we're here tonight. I mean, at least on the tax aspect, is to understand how does it work. Basically, as I said, if you're a French resident, you need to report your worldwide income to the French tax authority. If you're also a US person, you need to report your worldwide income to the US tax authority. So basically, you are in a situation where you need to report your worldwide income to the French tax authority and to the US tax authority. Obviously, you don't want to pay double tax. So for that, we're going to use the tax treaty between France and the US, which is working, again, as I said, very well for American people moving to France. The main rules, and this is pretty much the case in 99% of the case, we're going to look at where the income is generated. If the income is generated in the US, you are going to pay tax on that in the US, and we will apply a full tax credit on the French side. For example, I'm going to talk about the rental income. If you have a property located in the US which generates rental income, you are going to pay tax on that in the US, and we are going to apply your tax credit on the French side, which means regardless how much tax you're going to pay in the US, the French tax authority will apply a full tax credit. So there is no complementary tax. That's basically the case for dividends, for interest, for pension, social security. Most of the income fall into that category. As Daniel said, there is a lot of discussion right now going on with the remote working. If you're working from France or working while making money in the US, there is a lot of discussion right now. We can have a whole webinar on that. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that. And I'll be happy to discuss it privately if you have any question on that. But the general rules is that you're never going to pay double tax. Or you're going to pay tax in the US or you're going to pay tax in France. Sometimes you're going to pay complementary tax, but never the same tax on the same source of income. Just put a picture of the form. If you're already in France, you know what it means. The form 2047. You need to see it when you fill in the French tax returns. It has to be on the tax returns to apply the correct tax credit. moving forward quickly on the French real estate wealth tax. So basically, it's a special tax. If you own more than 1.3 million of net real asset. So for the first 5 years, it's only in France, and after 5 years, it's also for you assets you own outside France. You start paying a tax called the wealth tax. So basically from 0 to 800K, it's 0%, and then from 800 to 1.12 million, it's 0.5%, and one from 1.3, etc., it's increasing from 0.5 to 1.5%. It's only on net real estate asset, which means that we need to take off any mortgage you have on a property. So if you own a property in Paris of 2 million euros, but you have 1 million euros of mortgage on that, you won't be liable of paying the wealth tax. It's 1.3 net assets. Quickly on a few other topics. I'm going to talk about the property tax. I know in the US it's something that usually is very big and everyone is afraid of that. In France, it's not that huge. It's basically a property tax that is payable by the owner of a property if you own a property in France. And the amount is based on the estimated annual value. And there is some multiple set by a commune, but it's not comparable to what you have in the US. Usually it's not a big amount. We also have the dwelling tax, called taxe d'habitation. Since January 2023, all the taxpayers are no longer liable to pay this tax d'habitation on the main residence. It's only on the secondary residence on vacant properties. Two other small topics. There is the form, what we call the form 3916, and I think Tom mentioned the EAFA in the US. In the French, we are pretty much the same thing. It's called the form 3916. Basically, if you're a French tax resident and you have bank accounts outside France, you need to report it to the French tax authority. There is no tax consequence on that. It's just a matter of reporting, which is very important to do, but there is no tax consequence. Then we have a trust also. Maybe I will let Pierre-Alain talk about that. It's more on his field, but I'll let you go through that aspects in your presentation. So that's it for me. I know I've been pretty fast. I try to cover a maximum of topics in a few minutes, but if you have any question, I'll be happy to assist you. And if you want to shoot me an email or have a private consultation with me, I'll be happy to do it. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. Thank you everyone for having me. So my name is Pierre-Alain Conil. I'm usually referred to as Pierre the Notaire because it's a catchy nickname and because most of my US clients just call me Pierre, and it's simple that way. So basically, I'm going to try not to be too boring. In France, often notaires have a very bad reputation for that, so I will try to fight that reputation. Basically, I have a very peculiar practice as a French notaire because I've been advising English-speaking clients and mostly Americans for the last decade, roughly. So my daily activity, my daily practice involves, I would say, for around 90 to 95% of my work advising Americans. And as you may know, and if you don't, I will try to give you the explanations now. In certain cases and for a certain part of your future life with a link with France, you will need to have a discussion, potentially meet and sign deeds with a notaire. So in France, notaires, we are a highly regulated legal profession. We are like lawyers in certain aspects in the sense that just like for private practice lawyers, we advise clients for executing wills, for example, and we're also involved with settling estates, and we also advise clients for buying and selling a real estate property. Because again of my really niche practice, usually I'm in touch with my US clients, either because they are already established in France and they have questions. Sometimes they've been in France for 20 or 30 years and they don't know exactly how it works, especially surrounding estate planning. So whether or not they should have a will in France, what would happen with my trusts. Thank you, Benjamin, for that very good introduction to one of the areas where the job of the notaire and the job of the CPA overlap, because if you have trusts, then obviously you're going to have questions to raise with your CPA for income tax purposes, and you're going to have to raise questions with your notaire for estate tax purposes. So basically, sometimes advise clients who are already in France. They might also, again, want to buy real estate, so we are here to help them. And sometimes we advise clients when they have not yet moved to France. And frankly, it's much better that way, and that gives us much more options. You have more flexibility when you raise all of those questions before you have made the move. And I have to say that for the last year, 9 months, for reasons known by everyone, we have seen more and more clients with either interest or precise plans to moving to Europe and mostly here to France. Because again, I don't want to be too boring. I would say that the two main questions that would be part of my area of specialty that you would want to raise before moving to France would have to be with your estate plan. And of course, it depends a lot on how old you are, whether you have children, whether you think you're going to stay in France for 2 years or 20 years, whether you want to already transfer assets to your children, and whether you're moving here to retire, for example, or whether you're 25 years old and you're just here to work from France for a few years. But let's assume that you are planning on moving to France for the foreseeable future. Then we need to have a discussion, or you need to have a discussion with somebody like me surrounding the trust you may have or you may be considering having, which is obviously a very good tool in the US with no links with France for avoiding probate purposes. We also want to have a discussion about what does your current US will say. And do they provide for the creation of a testamentary trust, for example? And Tom was talking about how complicated it can be sometimes to open accounts, and actually to open accounts as Americans with French financial institutions, or as Americans living in France to modify your US accounts and, for example, add POD, TOD, payable on death, transferable on death provisions on your accounts, and also updating your IRA or 401ks beneficiary clause. So basically, you want to have a discussion before you have made the move to know more about how would that work if unfortunately you pass having moved to France and therefore having been a French resident for tax purposes. The criteria that matters for us, and as Benjamin was explaining, for income tax, and it's the same for estate tax purposes, is whether or not you are a French resident. We don't care about citizenship for French tax purposes. So whether you acquire, like Daniel, French citizenship or not, it will have literally zero bearing tax-wise in France. Of course, it's important for immigration purposes, but it's not important for tax purposes. So basically, you want to know exactly how it would work. You want to know if you need to have a French will put in place. And you also want to know, especially if you're remarried or if you have a certain configuration in your family that would make you want to make sure you can protect the surviving spouse. So you want to have a discussion about the French forced heirship system, the Napoleonic Code as sometimes it's referred to. So basically you want to know to which extent you can protect the surviving of you if you move as a couple, and what claims your children, if you have children, would have against your estate after you have moved to France. You may also want to consider the possibilities of making gifts or transfers to your children prior to moving to France. Again, our criteria being the residency, French residency. It's sometimes, and actually really often, a very good idea to at least consider making those gifts before having board on your plan. Because if you do that 2 years after having moved to France, then of course it's taxable in France. And if you consider transferring assets prior to moving to France, that could be a very efficient estate planning tool. And because notaires in France are famous for handling real estate transactions, because we have a monopoly for doing that. If you want to move to France and if you want to buy real estate, it's also important to have a discussion. If you have not moved to France yet, but if you are buying the property, after having visited it, and you're buying the property remotely, so you're not a French resident when you close on the property. That also gives us more leeway, more flexibilities, more planning tools in terms of the structuring of the title deed. So it's much better for all those aspects to have had a discussion with your lawyer, with your CPA, with your notaire before having moved to France, so that you know how it will unfold, you know how it works, and you know what tax consequences and legal consequences would be triggered if you do indeed move to France. And a good planning would help you minimize the tax downsides and potentially the legal downsides with the réserve héréditaire, with the forced heirship system. And again, this good planning would help you optimize the tax credit available, because in France we don't have the $15 million exemption that will be on starting in 2026. And I will not give you the figures because I don't want to discourage you from moving to France. But obviously there are more taxes in France if you don't plan right. But if you do plan right, that can be kept under control. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone, for those presentations. Let's jump in with some questions. Got quite a few questions. If you've got more questions, keep dropping them in the Q&A box at the foot of the screen. And let's dive in. Tom, I think this first one's for you, potentially. Nathan says, what amount of savings would you recommend a couple have when coming over to France to start a business?
Yeah, I don't know if that one's for me, actually, because, and I don't know if anyone can answer that, because, I mean, it depends on the business. It depends how much you're going to be spending. So I don't know if there's any kind of a tax or legal perspective on how much income you have to show. I know in some countries you have to show an income. That would probably be a better question maybe for Benjamin or Pierre-Alain. But that's not really a question that I could answer, I don't think.
It probably depends, as you say, what your plans are, and there's a second part to that. How much savings to recommend coming over to France to go to university in Paris over age 27? So I guess it's a question of how much money do you need potentially to live? Is that possibly something like that? Which I don't know. Benjamin and Daniel have a view on that sort of living costs to live in Paris.
Yeah, maybe I can try to answer the first question. For the second question, it really depends of your own situation and your standard of living. Where do you live? Are you living in Paris? Do you living outside Paris? But for the first question, from a corporate question, we always suggest our clients to come with at least 3 to 6 months of cash burn, which means that if you're planning to spend, for example, on your business, 10,000 euros a month to start your business, you should come with at least 30 to 60,000 euros of saving to start a business. This is not like a one answer. It really depends on each business. Some business taking more time to take over, and some business are more quicker than the other. But usually that's what we're advising to our clients, to at least come with 3 to 6 months of saving.
Yeah. I'd also like to chime in there, Hugo. The amount is lower than people expect. And that's usually what I end up seeing at a lot of these conferences, where we have an image in our mind of how much it costs to come to Paris, and that's based off staying at the fancy hotel in the center of Paris, and the cost for going to like Dôme restaurant in the middle of Paris, or what have you. That the actual cost of living in France is low because the French average salary is somewhere around 2,000 euros a month. And so my wife and I did the calculation a couple of years back, and we realized that with our mortgage, with food costs, with life costs, we need to earn 3,500 euros per month total to live off of. And so I had a client ask me on yesterday, can I make it in France on 150,000 for me, my wife, and my 2 kids? And that's a lot of money to live off of on an annual basis in France. Like, because I mean, Benjamin could probably attest to the cost of rents in Paris, but they're not that high. You can find something very decent for 2,000 euros a month, and rent's going to be your highest expense. And then, for food costs, maybe, 400 to 500 euros a month, and then you're off to the races, in terms of what else you're spending your money on. To qualify for the student visas, they're looking for 615 euros per month coming your way in your account. So that's roughly 7,000 euros annually. If you can show in your bank account, then you can already justify that for a student visa.
Thank you. This one I think is then for Tom. What is the best or recommended way to maintain a US IRA or other stock market traded accounts living in France? I think you covered a lot of that in your presentation, but just briefly maybe.
Yeah, I did. The main challenge is that most of the U.S. banks and brokerage firms, especially the brokerage firms, just don't want to deal with you. And so as I said, we use Charles Schwab and Interactive Brokers. Both will accommodate people living in France, but with Schwab, there's a bit of a hook to it, if you like. So if you've established your account in the U.S. with Schwab and then you move to France, that's fine. Yeah, you can change the address to a French address later. That's fine. But Schwab does not allow people living in France to open new accounts. So it's important those accounts get opened while you still have a US address. With Interactive Brokers, it doesn't matter. They do allow people to open new accounts living in France. And it doesn't matter whether it's retirement accounts or taxable accounts. It doesn't even matter whether you're a US citizen. The same rules apply with respect to Schwab and Interactive Brokers.
Thanks. This is a visa question for Daniel. I'm a semi-retired American. If I annually come to France for 2 to 3 months a year, could I telework 10 to 20 hours a week? I guess on a sort of tourist or visitor visa.
Yeah, if it's only 2 to 3 months per year in France, then I wouldn't even think about bothering to file for a visa. It's only when a person wants to stay consistently in France for more than 90 days at a time that it's worthwhile to even look into a visa. Um, then the question of can I telework as a tourist is essentially the same question as can I telework on the visitor visa. That France has not created a digital nomad visa that would put it in a very clear tone, can you or can't you? So the question remains, there is not an official source that says that you can, there is not an official source that says you can't. There's not a law and there's not a regulation that says that you can or cannot. What we then see is the norms. What in practice is actually happening? And there's where the French consulate replied in writing saying, we authorize people to telework in France if you do not have any impact on the French labor market. I think their explanation, which I think is an imperfect explanation until we get a law on the books, is that if you're not meddling with the French labor force, if you're not taking a job that belongs to a French person, then there's not a reason to prevent you from sitting on your laptop in some co-working cafe in the 6th arrondissement of Paris and do that for a month or so. But there's no way that I as a lawyer can make that promise until France comes around and makes either a digital nomad visa or they make a clear rule on this. And my law firm is taking the lead on that. We're trying to work through various deputies in the French National Assembly to get a finalized decision so that we can have clarity in our industry and that the accountants don't say one thing and the lawyers say the other thing.
Thanks. Another visa question. Do you need to, possibly visa, possibly tax. Do you need to show tax returns to get the 10-year residency card from visitor?
Yes, you need to show 5 years of tax returns.
Thanks. Ashley says, is Charles Schwab a way to open a French bank account? I've heard that can be difficult.
Well, Schwab is also a bank. It depends what you mean by bank account. If you need checking and a debit card, yes, that's possible. But as I said, you can't open a Schwab account if you already live in France with a French address. You have to open it with a US address, and then subsequently you can change it to a French address. And yes, you can get a debit card and checks on it if that's what you mean by a bank account. Yeah. But I should mention, it isn't a bank account. I mean, it isn't a bank in the sense that you can get mortgages, for example, or CDs or something like that. But you can get, you can get the debit card and checks. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
Hugo, just so you know, it's still possible to have a mortgage when you are a US citizen, and whether you move to France or not, there are just a handful of French banks that are still, because of the FATCA regulation and the obligation for the French bank to report to the IRS various information, and basically they don't want to bother. and because of heavy fines that have been imposed on French banks in the past. So it's possible, but you have to ask specialists. You have to ask, a loan broker who specializes in advising U.S. clients for that, so that they would direct you to the 2, 3, or 4 French banks we can do that. And it's kind of the same for opening a basic French bank account. So we're not talking here about financial investments and just the basic local branch that will give you the French IBAN that you need for many things, and that will give you the credit card that is so useful once you have actually moved. So it's possible, but you have to ask people who are used to working with Americans in France, and then they give you names of one of those very few bankers that are still okay to create accounts and to give mortgages to Americans.
Yeah, let me just say one more thing too. There are two sides to Schwab. There's what they call the retail side, where a client would go directly to Schwab and open an account. And there's what's called the institutional side, which is where our accounts are, the accounts we manage on behalf of clients. And it's a different kind of relationship. So on the retail side, if you go directly to Schwab, they have what's called a global account available, where you can even hold various currencies like euros. You can trade on non-US exchanges, I believe, although it's a little expensive. And I'm not sure what kind of products they offer there, whether they offer checks and debit cards. So when I say we can get checks and debit cards, that's for the institutional accounts, the ones we're managing. We can do that on our brokerage accounts, but our accounts cannot be multi-currency with Schwab. We can only have US dollar accounts. With Interactive Brokers, we can have multi-currency accounts, but they don't offer checks and debit cards. They're not a bank.
Thanks. I think there are other options like Wise multi-currency accounts and Revolut, I think, operating France. There are those kind of options too if you need a simple account to get started. So there are a couple of tax questions here. First one, what time of year? When is the French tax deadline?
Yeah. The French deadline is in spring, so it's the year after the tax filing. So for example, in 2026, it's going to be in spring 2026 for the year 2025. And unfortunately, there is no tax extension like we do have in the US. So everything needs to be done on time. Usually for primo resident, for the first time filer in France, the deadline is in the beginning of May, and it's on paper. And then you will get a tax assessment in the following September, and then you will get a tax ID that will give you the opportunity to file online the year after.
Thanks. So another question about a tax question about with Roth IRAs, and are they I suppose it's a tax treaty question, but are they only subject to US tax if you're receiving distributions from a US Roth IRA account?
So it's considered as a US source of income, so it's going to be taxable in the US. And if you're a French resident, you will need to report that to the French tax returns, but you will apply your tax credit to not pay double tax.
Thanks. So question for Pierre. What do you think will happen regarding choice of national law for wills of expats in France? That's related to a conflict between EU regulations and French laws about succession.
So it's a very good and very, highly specific question. So I will try not to lose everyone and not to bore everybody to death. So basically, the idea that according to EU regulation, you have now the possibility to opt out of French law. So you're an American, you have settled in France, you can opt out of French law, and basically, regardless of whether you have a will in France or a will in the US, it doesn't matter. If you have a provision in the will that says, I want the law of the state of California, US law, to apply to the settlement of my state, as a matter of principle, French law no longer applies. That's a 2012 regulation that kicked in 2015 that has enabled us for the last 10 years to do that. So we were very happy with the mechanism, and it was working perfectly, enabling Americans having moved to France to, again, avoid the application of French law. And basically what we're talking about here is avoid the forced heirship provision, i.e. the protection that the children have in France. against a will that, you know, either disinherits them or protect the surviving spouse more than what French law does. Because in France, at the death of the first spouse, even when we're talking about common children, so very simple situation, you know, two children and from the two members of the couple, when the first one dies, the children of the deceased have a claim against the estate. Most of the time, the surviving spouse is entitled to rights in life interest, usufruit, so the right to use and the right to rent, for example, properties, but they do not have full ownership. So we usually draw a parallel, or we usually, you know, consider there is an American way and a French way of drafting a will. The American way is more the I love you will. Everything goes to the surviving spouse. When the French will is more a mixed protection for the surviving spouse, for the life interest, and for the children, for the remainder interest. So basically, they inherit at the death of the first spouse. Long story short, that was working well, avoiding French law up until 2021, when the loi séparatisme, which is the law this person is referring to, kicked in. And this loi séparatisme, and I'm sorry, it's really complicated and absolutely dumb. It's really stupid. The loi séparatisme was supposed to avoid the application of Sharia law being the law of certain Muslim country, in France. So the idea was to say that you are of Saudi Arabia. If you say, I want Saudi law to apply, it means that you will apply in France, potentially for French real property, a rule that we don't like at all, that we consider is not up to you know, our core values, such as the equality between sexes, because under Sharia law, you don't, when, you know, women inherit, daughters inherit half of what sons receive. Long story short again, the Sharia law thing, the loi séparatisme, created a mechanism that is so broad that it basically applies to Americans having moved to France, and that limits their ability to opt out of French law. So basically, as a matter of principle, they can still opt out of French law, but if they have a link with France or Europe, such as living in France, this loi séparatisme will apply. So we hope this loi séparatisme will be struck down by a court order, because just like our viewer was implying, it is very likely against our against this European regulation, and because of the hierarchy of norm, our French law should not be against the European regulation. So for the moment, we are still advising our clients to opt out of French law in their will, because it's still better for specific reasons I will not explain now. But we hope at some point this loi séparatisme will no longer be part of our body of law. And sorry, it was really too long.